This Parliament is a dead Parliament. It should no longer sit. It has no moral right to sit on these green benches, and whatever they don't like to hear it, Mr. Speaker. They don't like the truth. Twice they have been asked to let the electorate decide upon whether they should continue to sit in their seats while they block 17.4 million people's votes. This Parliament is a disgrace. Given the opportunity, since I am asked, let me tell them the truth. They could vote no confidence at any time, but they're too cowardly. They could agree to a motion to allow this House to dissolve, but they're too cowardly to give it a vote. This Parliament should have the courage to face the electorate. But it won't. It won't, because so many of them are really all about preventing us leaving the European Union at all. But the time is coming. The time is coming, Mr. Speaker, when even these turkeys won't be able to prevent Christmas.
Stop. Before you watch this clip, I need you to understand exactly what you are about to witness. Because this footage, this man standing in that chamber, pointing his finger, voice breaking with fury, he was not giving a speech. He was issuing a warning. And today, right now, every single word he said has come true. MPs have triggered a formal no-confidence vote against Keir Starmer. Not rumoured, not threatened, triggered. And when you watch this clip knowing that, it will change everything you thought you understood about British politics. That wasn't a speech, that was a diagnosis. Delivered in that chamber while the entire political establishment sneered, rolled their eyes and dismissed every word he said, Nigel Farage stood at that dispatch box and told Britain exactly what this Parliament was, what it was doing, and precisely where it was going to end. And they laughed. The MPs on those green benches, the same MPs who are now scrambling, panicking, calculating their survival in the wreckage of a collapsing government, they sat there and they laughed at him. They weren't laughing today. Because here is what you need to understand about what has just happened, and I mean the specific, constitutional, politically irreversible thing that has happened today that most of the media coverage is already getting wrong. This is not a rebellion. This is not a party in panic. This is not MPs briefing anonymously to journalists to signal their unhappiness in the choreographed way that British political theatre has perfected over decades. This is accountability arriving at the door. And it didn't knock. It kicked it in. The MPs who triggered this no-confidence vote did not do it because of bad poll numbers. They didn't do it because of a difficult news cycle or a bad PMQs performance, or the kind of short-term political pressure that government whipping operations are specifically designed to manage and absorb and neutralise. They did it because Keir Starmer crossed a line that 17.4 million people drew. And that number, 17.4 million, is the most important number in British politics today. More important than any polling figure. More important than any majority in the Commons. More important than any internal Labour calculation about electability or optics or the next election cycle. Because that number represents the largest democratic instruction ever delivered by the British public to the British state. And what Starmer did, what he chose to do deliberately, knowingly, with full awareness of what it meant, was look at that number, look at those 17.4 million people and decide that his agenda mattered more. That decision ended his premiership today. Let me tell you what the Brexit surrender actually was. Not the version that his communications team spent days crafting. Not the managed language of pragmatic realignment or responsible international cooperation or whatever carefully selected framing was road-tested in focus groups before being delivered to a press that was expected to absorb and repeat it. The actual thing. The specific thing. What Starmer agreed to, what he signed away, is not peripheral. It is not the minor regulatory adjustment that his allies in the media have been trying to characterise it as since the moment the announcement landed and the reaction began. What was surrendered is structural, constitutional. The kind of concession that reshapes the fundamental relationship between Britain and the European Union in ways that do not bend back, that establish legal precedents that future governments inherit whether they voted for it or not, and that represent the precise opposite of what 17.4 million people were told, explicitly, by promise after promise, would never happen. And here is the detail that matters. Here is the specific piece of information that the broad news coverage keeps skipping past, that the headlines keep failing to include, because including it properly would make the scale of what has been done impossible to mischaracterise. This is not the first time. The Supreme Court already found it. When the Supreme Court examined this government's conduct and found legally, constitutionally, in the most authoritative judicial setting available in this country, that Starmer's government was operating a secret U-scheme, a covert programme of incremental alignment being pursued beneath the surface of the government's public commitments, below the level of parliamentary scrutiny, away from the democratic daylight that the people and their representatives are supposed to be able to shine into the workings of the government that serves them. The Supreme Court found it. And what did Starmer do with that finding? He didn't reverse course. He didn't acknowledge the democratic violation. He didn't stand up in Parliament and give the honest account of his government's conduct that the judicial finding demanded. He carried on. And the Brexit surrender is the completion of that journey. The open, explicit, fully public execution of the strategy that the Supreme Court found being pursued in secret. The cover has been removed. The intention has been exposed. And the MPs who triggered the no confidence vote looked at the arc of this story, from the secret scheme to the open surrender, and made the calculation that protecting Keir Starmer from the democratic consequence of that arc was no longer something they could ask their conscience, their constituents, or their careers to sustain. I want to stop for a second, because if you've been following this story, if you've been watching what has happened to this government from the beginning, I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, we've been here before. You're thinking, there have been moments before that looked like the end. The Supreme Court ruling, the parliamentary removal, the Farage chamber destruction. Every time there was a reason it was different. And every time it wasn't. I understand that. The scepticism is earned. But I need you to pay close attention to what makes this moment different, because there is something different, something specific. Something that changes the calculation in a way that no previous crisis managed to change it. And that thing is the no confidence trigger itself, not the threat, not the discussion, not the private conversations in corridors and the anonymous briefings and the carefully managed signals that Labour MPs have been sending for months through every channel available to people who want the message received without the consequence of having sent it. The actual trigger. Because a triggered no confidence vote is not an opinion. It is not a position. It is not a political gesture that can be managed, absorbed and survived through the standard toolkit of crisis communications, loyalty enforcement and narrative management that has kept this government alive through every previous crisis. It is a constitutional mechanism. Once it is triggered, it must be faced. It must be survived or lost. And the conditions under which Keir Starmer must survive it are the conditions of a man whose authority has been systematically dismantled by everything that preceded this moment. Watch his reaction, not the statement, not the prepared language, the reaction in the immediate aftermath of the trigger. The fury. Because the fury is the most politically significant thing that Starmer has done since this story began. more significant than the Brexit surrender, more significant than the Supreme Court exposure, more significant than the moment Farage stood in that chamber and reduced him to a Prime Minister who could not survive his own Parliament sitting. Because the fury reveals something that all of the careful political management has been specifically designed to hide. It reveals what he actually believed. He believed he could do this. He believed genuinely, fundamentally, at the level of a man who has spent his entire political career operating in the space between what he says and what he does, that the Brexit surrender, like everything before it, could be managed, could be packaged, could be presented to his MPs and to the public in language careful enough, framing clever enough, and spin comprehensive enough to prevent the consequence that the action demanded. He believed the machinery would protect him, the same machinery that protected him through the Supreme Court ruling, the same machinery that protected him through the career-ending evidence, the same machinery that by every internal calculation his operation was running should have prevented the no-confidence vote from ever reaching the point of formal trigger. The machinery has stopped. And the fury, the raw, uncontrolled, publicly visible fury of a man discovering that the system he believed was on his side has turned, is Keir Starmer finally understanding that. That is not the performance of a man with a plan. That is not the controlled anger of a leader making a strategic choice to appear forceful. That is the sound, the specific, unmistakable political sound of a man who has run out of moves discovering, in the most public and most final way available, that the game is over. Let me tell you who this story is really about. Not Keir Starmer. Not the MPs in that chamber who spent months calculating their loyalty arithmetic while the evidence accumulated around them. Not the constitutional experts or the parliamentary authorities or the political commentators who are now applying their analytical frameworks to a situation that has moved so far beyond normal political analysis that the frameworks barely reach it. This story is about 17. 4 million people, not an abstraction, not a statistic, not a number that gets deployed in political arguments and then forgotten when the argument moves on. Real people. People who went to polling stations in 2016 and in an act of democratic participation that was described to them and promised to them as the most direct expression of democratic power available in the British system, voted for something. Not because they were told to, not because a political party organised them into a block and delivered their votes in the way that party politics manages democratic participation, but because they made a choice. A personal, considered, specific democratic choice. The kind of choice that the democratic system is supposed to exist to make possible and, when made, to honour. And they watched that choice be undermined. Not immediately. Not openly. Not in the kind of direct democratic reversal that would at least have the honesty of being transparent about what it was doing. But incrementally. Covertly. Through the mechanism that the Supreme Court examined and found and reported, through the secret scheme, through the managed alignment, through the Brexit surrender, step by step, promise by promise, line by line, until today. When the MPs they sent to Westminster to represent them, the specific people whose entire democratic mandate derives from the votes of constituents who are looking at this Brexit surrender and asking the only question that matters when a government violates the democratic instruction it was given. Who is actually in charge here? Us or them? Those MPs answered that question today, not with words. Not with another carefully crafted statement or another round of managed media appearances, but with the most powerful democratic tool available to a parliament that has finally, after everything, decided that the answer to that question cannot be them. The no confidence vote. For the 17. 4 million, and for the millions more who never voted Leave but who understand, in the gut-level way that democratic instinct operates, that a government which breaks its most fundamental promises to the people who gave it power is a government that has forfeited its right to that power. This is the moment. Not the final moment. The reckoning still has steps to run. The formal process has its constitutional timeline and its parliamentary procedural requirements and its specific sequence of events that will carry it from today's trigger to whatever conclusion the evidence and the democratic logic of the situation demand. But this is the moment when the arc of this story becomes visible in its full shape. And the full shape is this: a government that believed it was immune to accountability discovering that no government is immune to accountability. Go back to that clip. Watch it again now, after everything I've just told you. Listen to the words differently. This parliament is a dead parliament. He wasn't predicting a political crisis. He was identifying a democratic disease. The specific structural rot at the centre of a political system that had decided that managing outcomes mattered more than respecting mandates. They don't like the truth. He wasn't talking about one moment. He was describing a governing philosophy. The philosophy that has run this Labour government from the day it walked into Downing Street with its promises and its narrative and its carefully constructed public image of integrity and transparency and democratic commitment. They're too cowardly. That word, cowardly, is the word that Labour MPs used in their private conversations in the hours before the trigger. Not publicly, not yet, but in the spaces where political truth gets spoken before it gets managed into something the communications operation can handle. They used that word about their own leader. They used it because it is accurate. Because the Brexit surrender was not an act of courage. It was not the difficult decision of a leader willing to absorb political costs to do what he believed was right. It was the act of a man who had spent his entire premiership calculating what he could get away with and who miscalculated for the first time, for the final time, the point at which getting away with it became impossible. The time is coming. The time is coming, Mr. Speaker, when even these turkeys won't be able to prevent Christmas. It has come. Not in the way anyone predicted, not on the timeline that the political analysts mapped, not through the specific mechanism that the commentators expected when they were modelling the possible endings of this government. But it has come. The no confidence vote has been triggered. Starmer's fury has confirmed his desperation. The Labour MPs who delivered this moment have done what the people who sent them to Westminster needed them to do. And the man who told them, all of them, that this moment was coming, years before the evidence made it undeniable, years before the Supreme Court confirmed it, years before the Brexit surrender completed it, is watching from exactly the position he has always occupied in this story. The man who was right. Let me tell you where this goes. Not as prediction, as logic. The no confidence vote creates a formal constitutional process that has a timeline. That timeline runs through a parliament that has already seen its cohesion destroyed by the Brexit surrender, through a Labour Party whose internal reckoning is now happening at a speed that the whipping operation cannot match. The MPs who triggered the vote did not do it alone. They did it as the tip of a much larger block of Labour members who have spent months making the loyalty calculation and who have now finally, after the Brexit surrender, found that the calculation no longer adds up on the side of loyalty. The government needs those MPs to survive the vote. And those MPs, the ones who watched the Brexit surrender, who read the Supreme Court findings, who saw Starmer's fury and understood what it revealed, who have constituencies full of people who voted in 2016 and are watching what their Prime Minister has done to that vote, those MPs are being asked to do something that the evidence of everything that has happened makes politically suicidal. They are being asked to vote for him, to stand in front of their constituents, the people who sent them to Westminster, and cast a vote of confidence in a Prime Minister whose conduct the evidence has exposed and whose claims to democratic integrity have been systematically demolished by the full accumulated weight of this political story. Some will. Because the machinery still functions, even if it no longer functions with its previous efficiency. Because the whips will apply every tool available. Because political careers are real things with real consequences, and the immediate cost of voting no confidence is not nothing. But the question is not whether some Labour MPs will hold. The question is how many. And that number, the number of Labour MPs whose loyalty to Keir Starmer survives the Brexit surrender and the no confidence trigger and the eruption of fury and everything that came before, is a number that is shrinking. Hourly. The internal Labour communications are reporting a reckoning that the party machine is struggling to manage.
The private conversations that are happening right now in the buildings and the corridors and the parliamentary offices of the MPs whose votes determine the survival or the end of this government are conversations that are moving in one direction, away from him. Because the loyalty calculation is a calculation about survival.
About whether supporting Keir Starmer now makes it more or less likely that a Labour MP can survive the next election and remain in the parliament they chose as their political home. That calculation has an answer now, an answer that the Brexit surrender made definitive, and the answer is not the one that saves his government. Britain has been patient. That is the thing that the political establishment consistently underestimates and consistently pays for underestimating. The patience of the British public. The specific, deep, historically rooted willingness of a people who built the world's first parliamentary democracy to give that system every possible chance to do the right thing before demanding the consequences that the wrong thing requires. They gave it chances, they watched the promises, they heard the commitments. They accepted the assurances that the Brexit they voted for would be respected, that the democratic instruction of 17.4 million people would be honoured, that the man sitting in Downing Street understood the difference between winning power and deserving it. They were lied to, not once, not accidentally, but systematically, deliberately. But patience is not the same as tolerance. And Britain, the real Britain, has stopped tolerating. The no-confidence vote is the mechanism. But the movement behind it is not parliamentary. The movement is 17.4 million people, and the millions more who simply believe that the time comes when even the turkeys can't prevent Christmas. That time is now. This is not the end of a new cycle. This is not a political crisis that will be managed and absorbed and survived in the way that every previous crisis was managed and absorbed and survived. This is the reckoning, the one that was always coming, the one that the evidence always demanded. It is complete now. The no-confidence vote has been triggered. Starmer is finished. And the 17. 4 million people who were told that their vote was the most powerful democratic act they would ever perform, that it would be respected, that it would be honoured, that the political class understood that you cannot take the mandate of the people and then govern as if it does not exist. Those 17.4 million people are about to find out whether the system they were asked to trust actually works. Today, finally, irreversibly, constitutionally, it is beginning to prove them right.